Welcome, everyone. Welcome. We know people are coming into the room, so we'll give everyone a minute or two to join in. Welcome. You are here in the right place if you are here for Infrastructure for All, an intro to bike and pedestrian projects in the region. We're going to get started in just a minute, but again, welcome and thank you so much for being here this Friday. My name is Kristen Hott. I'm your MC for today's webinar, and I am delighted to be hosting you on behalf of PlanRVA. For those who may not be familiar with us, PlanRVA is the Planning District Commission for the 9 localities of the Richmond region, established way back in 1969 by the Virginia legislature. And we're here to foster regional cooperation and plan for the future across our 4 key areas: community development, environment, emergency management, and of course, transportation, which brings us to our exciting topic today. I bring greetings on behalf of our Executive Director, Martha Schickel, and want to say just how thrilled we are to be in our role as convener today. The fantastic teams at Bike Walk RVA, sports backers, and of course, our distinguished panel of speakers, and you too, Phil, for this insightful hour-long webinar. Again, you're here for Infrastructure for All, an introduction to bike pedestrian projects in the region. So before we dive in, I'd like to give you all attendees, guests, a chance to we want to know who you are, who's joining us today. So take a moment and introduce yourself in the chat. Tell us your name, where you live in the region, and then maybe your favorite bike or pedestrian activity. So it could be like your neighborhood walk or mountain trail that you love, any kind of activity that you want us to know about. We would love to see that and greet you. And of course, if anyone else is joining us after we introduce, my name is Kristen Hott from PlanRVA, and we're going to get into the meat of things in just a minute. And oh, wow, yes. Capitol Trail and Fall Line. There's been some tours lately of the Fall Line. I don't know if you've gone on those, Ellen, but pretty exciting stuff to see that underway. Well, we definitely want to keep the momentum going. Yes, these trails. Well, you came to the right place today, right? Because we're going to hear from our panelists today. Jacob Helmbolt, our State Trails Administrator from the Virginia Department of Transportation, will be speaking. Andy Baynow, our Transportation Engineering Program Manager with the City of Richmond Public Works, and PlanRVA's own Phil Riggin, our Active Transportation Planner. Before we jump in, though, I'd really love to introduce you to our representative from Bike Walk RVA and Sports Backers, Natalie Rayner. She's going to bring some greetings. Take it away, Natalie.
Hi, everyone. My name is Natalie. I'm the engagement manager for Bike Walk RVA. We advocate for comfortable and connected places for people to bike and walk in the Richmond region. And we are so excited for you all to join us for this webinar today, and also excited for you to join us for Bike Month. So if you don't know, May is Bike Month. We have over 70 bike-related and bike adjacent programs this month. All of that information can be found on rvabikemonth.org, and you can find a calendar with all the deets so you can jump into all types of social rides. And it's only May 9th right now, so you still have 3 full weeks to join in on all the fun. So thank you.
And yeah, it's Bike Month. I bought a new cruiser, and I am so excited to hook it onto the back of my car and get to some of these awesome places to enjoy the sun and the fun. Thank you, Natalie, for reminding me about all the events. Well, so now let's go ahead and transition into our discussion today. We're going to hear from our panelists, as I mentioned, and Jacob Helmbolt from the Virginia Department of Transportation is going to take the lead. So take the virtual floor away, Jacob.
Do you want me to, since you have the slides, are you gonna, okay.
We'll share.
All righty. Do I need to advance them? Do I have control over that?
I'll go ahead and do that. Just let me know when I went ahead.
Okay. All right, will do. All right, well, thank you, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I'm Jacob Helmbolt, usually go by Jake. I'm the State Trails Administrator in the relatively newly created State Trails Office at VDOT. It was stood up just over 2 years ago, and I've been with VDOT for a year. So I'm going to first touch on some infrastructure related to trails, but largely what I'm going to cover is different types of infrastructure that you'll see around Richmond, and basically is kind of intro to my previous life outside of VDOT. For those of you that aren't familiar, I was the city's pedestrian, bicycle, and trails coordinator for about 13 years before returning back to VDOT. So I'll be going over some of the infrastructure that has kind of evolved over time, just to kind of give you an idea of what's on the ground, what infrastructure looks like, and how it has evolved over the last decade plus in Richmond. So really quickly, James River Branch Trail, since I'm in the Trails office, I'll kick it off with that. If you could advance to the next slide. So you'll see these two red bars that kind of flew in. That shows a 2-mile corridor of an abandoned rail line. It was a CSX rail line in the south side of Richmond. That project goes back to about 2009 when I first was involved with it when I was previously at VDOT, and it has taken years and years to finally move forward. One of the big sticking points with those types of rail to trail projects is getting the corridors. Even though they're abandoned, oftentimes the railroad companies like to get a pretty penny for them. So the Northam administration, as they were departing office, were kind enough to give the city the money to acquire that first 2 miles. So that is under construction right now. That will provide a real enhancement to Southside Richmond. It serves a corridor that is not served by the road network, and it goes through a couple of communities that have really been neglected over the years. So it's going to open up health opportunities, transportation opportunities, and mobility access opportunities. A lot of those streets didn't connect through because of the rail corridor, which now those neighborhoods will have some points of access. So I think it's going to be a fantastic addition to our bike network. And to the east, there on the right side of the screen, you can see this blue line. That's the Fall Line Trail. The idea eventually, hopefully, whether it has to be via road connections or via a continuation of a separate greenway path type of arrangement, connect over to the Fall Line Trail to really create a connected network. Next slide. And so this is an example of the current construction over at the western terminus by Westover Hills Boulevard. This is Old Midlothian Turnpike that it's crossing by the formerly George Wythe High School. For those of you familiar with the old name, it's now the Richmond High School for the Arts. And kind of in the far background is where it terminates at Westover Hills Boulevard. So rapidly proceeding, and it'll be exciting to see that on the ground. Next slide, please. So just kind of taking you through a quick tour of the evolution of some of the infrastructure in Richmond. When I joined the city back in 2011, I can't recall offhand, but I think there were maybe like 2 streets in all of the city that had any kind of bike lane. And, 15-ish years ago, basically about the only tool in the toolbox was either your standard 5-foot bike lane with nothing more than a 4 or 6-inch stripe separating it from traffic. And then sharrows came along around that same time, and there was admittedly an over-reliance on sharrows. It was seen as a cheap and easy way to put stuff on the ground, but it's not dedicated infrastructure. Next slide. So that's the same street, that's 2nd Street, right over by the War Memorial. So that was one of the earlier bike lane projects that was put in by doing what's referred to as a road diet or a roadway conversion, take up some of that excess space, reallocate it to serve multiple modes better. Next slide. This is Brooklyn Parkway. On the north side, just north of the Diamond, that's the previous configuration, 4-lane median divided kind of boulevard type street. It had a quasi parking lane. The parking lane was only about 6 feet wide, and thus, since that's narrower than a standard parking lane, which usually has a minimum of 7 feet and typically more like 7.5 to 8 feet, virtually no one ever parked in it. The result is you get a wide road, multiple lanes, nothing creating friction along the edge via parked cars. And so the speeds were very high for the very modest amount of traffic. I think, if I recall off the top of my head, about 6,000 vehicles a day, way over capacity. And so it went through an iterative process. Next slide. We put in basically a buffered bike lane. So the edge stripe was retained there for the parking lane, even though it was rather narrow. Rather than eradicating it, we put in a buffered bike lane. One of the problems with that was because the parking lane was left at that narrow configuration, a wide bike lane resulted in sometimes drivers weren't quite clear on what exactly that was, even though there were bike lane stencils in there. So occasionally people would use that as a travel lane. Sometimes they would use it to pass vehicles if they didn't like the fact that someone was now occupying the single travel lane and going the speed limit. Next slide. So as a result, a couple of years ago, we again made a little bit of a change up, and we moved to what's often called a separated bike lane, sometimes referred to as a protected bike lane, by moving the parking off the curb, placing the bike lane adjacent to the curb, and then having a buffer with the flexible delineators in that buffer, eliminating that issue of people trying to drive in the bike lane and using it as a travel lane. So that's just kind of an example of how over time the infrastructure evolved, putting stuff down, what's called quick build projects. So it's paint and posts, allows you to put something on the pavement, and if it's not working as intended, come back, change it up, tweak it. And so that was an example of where it went through kind of iterative processes. And then in the future, this also is along the Fall Line Trail corridor, where the Fall Line is envisioned to peel off of Hermitage Road and head over towards Brook Road. Next slide. Westover Hills Boulevard on the south side, basically heading towards what some may know as the Nickel Bridge. That's the boulevard bridge that connects over to Bird Park. Long was this 4-lane road. In the far distance, it drops to 2 lanes where it goes across the 2-lane Nickel Bridge. As a result, this again was really over capacity. Even though there's a significant amount of traffic, the fact that the road drops to 2 lanes really negates the necessity for 4 lanes like this. What we saw from traffic studies and speed studies was that most people would drive in the left lane in anticipation of the fact that they were going over the bridge and that right lane dropped or kind of verged off onto Riverside Drive. And so since most of the traffic was proceeding over the bridge, the majority of traffic would be in that inner lane. And the dynamic that you would see is that people would try to get ahead of the queue of traffic, the platoon, as it's referred to, the group of vehicles, by speeding up in the right lane and zooming past to get to the head of the line, so that they could be all of 6 cars at the most, say, usually ahead. So really needlessly creating or inducing higher speed driving. Technically, parking was allowed there, but again, because it was relatively narrow and with those speeds, most people did not feel safe parking their vehicles there. So it was completely underutilized as parking. And of course, it didn't create a very hospitable bicycling environment yet. It was a popular route to get across, lots of recreational trips to get across to the north side. Of course, all of our bridges serve as these limiting points of river access or crossing the river. So just about every bridge is going to see demand for bicyclists and pedestrians, and this was one of the heavier ones. So next slide. Just relatively recently, after a number of years of some back and forth with concerns over it's going to create Carmageddon, traffic is going to be overwhelming, Again, a paint and post separated bike lane was recently installed, moves the parking off the curb, creates a nice delineated space for parking where it's not ambiguous as to whether you can park or should park. Gets the bicyclists back behind that row of parking to give it a degree of both spatial and physical separation, and takes it down to one travel lane, kind of right sizing the road, if you will. Anytime we had opportunities to try to reallocate space on roads where we knew that we had more travel lanes than necessary, or even wider lanes, reallocating that space to get better accommodations for bicyclists in there. And also, one of the benefits of doing these types of road diets or roadway conversions is that for the pedestrians crossing those streets, instead of having to cross 2 lanes of motor vehicle traffic, basically now it's a matter of you're crossing a bike lane and a single travel lane for vehicles. So it's safer and easier, especially at those intersections where you don't have a signal or a stop control. So in some cases around the city, you'll see bike lane projects where you don't necessarily see a lot of bike traffic, but we also specifically, and I say we, even though I'm technically not with the city anymore, old habits die hard. And I guess speaking from the context of when I was there, what we were often targeting was even on roads where we knew there may not be a lot of bike use, it provided better opportunities, say, for access to transit if someone was going to bike. And as importantly, by doing that roadway reconfiguration, reducing the number of lanes, you eliminate what's referred to as multiple threat exposure, where a pedestrian may have one car yield or stop for them, and then the car in the adjacent lane doesn't. So on some of those streets, we saw higher crash rates for pedestrians, and by targeting those for roadway conversions, not only were we putting in bike lanes, but we are really, one of the key elements was addressing that pedestrian exposure. Next slide. Scott's Addition. When I joined the city back in 2011, Scott's Addition was only just starting to see some turnover. It was a light industrial area primarily. You started to see a little bit of turnover bit by bit, and then in the last decade plus, it just exploded with all of this development. New apartment buildings, adaptive reuse of existing buildings, meaderies, wineries, breweries, restaurants. Suddenly it was this hub of activity, and it was really difficult to keep up, quite honestly, with the rapidity of the pace of change. Lots of lacking pedestrian infrastructure, again, because it was largely industrial. The city was really scrambling to try to keep up, and there still is a lot of work to be done over there. But this is an example. Those were all new apartments on the left there. Next slide. And this let's start on the image on the right. That is that same apartment building looking from the opposite direction. Just since I have left the city a year ago, that was a project that we're waiting. It was waiting for repaving to be able to implement this 2-way cycle track bike lane on that 1-way street. Another street there in Scott's Addition, again, a 2-way cycle track. And then on the far left is what's referred to as a contraflow lane, which is where a one direction bike lane going the opposite direction of the travel direction for automobiles to allow a little more direct path of travel for bicyclists. So it eliminates some of that out of direction travel that results from some 1-way street patterns. So just a real quick snapshot of a number of the different projects that have kind of evolved over the years. One of the big things that the city has tried to do with these is take advantage of what's called the paving program. So far easier to kind of bake this into the process of roadway maintenance and restripe the roadway at the time of repaving. Since you've got a blank slate, city would try to identify those streets that were ready for kind of or make them ready for a retrofit like this. have those plans drawn up, knowing that there would be a repaving project on the horizon. Plans are ready to go as soon as that new pavement goes down. The contractors are able to restripe it. And so for marginal cost, you're able to put down infrastructure that otherwise oftentimes would be waiting on grant funding. Anytime you have federal grant projects, it's a much more laborious, time-consuming, bureaucratic process. And of course, right now with the new administration in DC, they're really taking aim at a lot of bike pedestrian infrastructure. So relying on federal grants was always a tenuous prospect, and even more so now. So doing what's called mainstreaming, where you're just kind of incorporating it into your routine pavement maintenance operations really garners a lot more benefits. You can get much more down more quickly and at cheaper cost. So I think that's all the examples that I have visually. Next slide. I'm not sure if there's one after this. Oh, yeah. Downtown, 3rd Street. This is actually the 3rd and Franklin intersection. We're looking up Franklin in that larger picture on the left. Franklin Street was the city's first two-way separated cycle track bike lane. And then 3rd Street was designed as kind of an intersecting route. Initially, the city had planned on using 2nd Street as a north-south route. With the redesign of the GRTC bus network several years ago in 2018, that took 2nd Street off the table in Jackson Ward because more bus routes were added. So it really created kind of too much use, conflicting priorities on 2nd. So what we did at the city was we had kind of the primary route coming down 1st Street from the interstate, and then that intersects with Franklin, jogs over to 3rd Street, and there's a stub of 3rd Street that also goes up to Broad Street to provide access to the BRT station there. And then 3rd Street continues on down to Bird and does kind of this dogleg jog over to 2nd Street. So a little bit circuitous, but it kind of is reflective of some of the challenges that are often faced with trying to thread the needle, if you will, through parts of downtown where you have different impediments dealing with all the other land uses, traffic patterns, transit routes, all that kind of stuff. So I think that's actually the last slide there, if I'm not mistaken.
Thank you so much, Jacob. I just want to say, if anyone else is on the call learning new things today, I'm definitely one of them. Paint and post platoon, and I also I've driven by the James River Branch Trail construction and was curious about, makes me think, oh, is that connecting to the fall line? So thank you so much for bringing some clarity and for the before, after, and then even the after. Evolution of infrastructure and design in our city. We're going to transition to our next speaker, but feel free to put questions in or hold them to the end. We're going to hear from Andy Bay now from the City of Richmond, Department of Public Works. He'll do a short introduction of himself, but we're also going to learn about something called LQC, and I can't wait to find out more about what that might be. So take it away, Andy.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me. I'm Andy Bano at the City of Richmond. Let's see, I'm trying to think the couple of things that you wanted to hear about. Oh, favorite bike-related thing. My favorite bike-related thing, I'm shaming Jake for getting to answer this question in his intro, but my favorite bike-related thing is not the infrastructure itself. It's helping people come up with stories and strategies to normalize bicycling as transportation. That's a big motivator for me. If you want to go to the next slide, Sid. Everything that we're doing bike related goes back to the North Star of the City of Richmond, which is Vision Zero. So Richmond is, I'm sort of, for those of you that are joining this webinar, you probably have heard this before, but it's worth repeating that the City of Richmond is committed to eliminating all severe traffic crashes. That's the gist of Vision Zero. while building a street network that accommodates people of all ages, all abilities, and all forms of travel. That's complete streets. And what a happy coincidence for us that that approach also delivers safe and healthy streets, which is, you know, one of the other things that we're getting more emphasis on with the new administration, with Mayor Avula having a background in health. Any kind of work that we're doing around Vision Zero and complete streets is going to make bicycling through Richmond more comfortable, safer, more appealing for people of all ages and abilities. So when we invest in streets, we want a return on investment that includes the things that, you know, planners will often talk about: cleaner air, safer streets in the abstract, healthier people, and all of this stuff. This is nothing short of culture change. So again, if you're the type of person that's going to join a webinar like this to learn about bike infrastructure in the Richmond region, you're the type of person that can help us with that changing of culture in and around Richmond. Next slide. So this is a very simplistic graphic that I borrowed from our friends at the Dutch Cycling Embassy. We recently had some folks from overseas come spend a day in Richmond with a training workshop. The reason for that is, while it's nice to have interaction with our peers cities about what they're doing, what they're trying, and their lessons learned, we never want to lose sight of what could be. So if you're looking around the world at premier designers, the Dutch are right there at the top. And so this is a graphic that they put together that I thought was really helpful. And the image on the left, or the group of images on the left, represents origins and destinations. So it's the areas around town and the relationship between those areas that people are moving through. So this is one, like, from an engineering point of view, how we take this abstract idea of bike networks for all ages and abilities, and we put it at the engineering level and deliver something to make it happen. We're thinking about and looking at analyzing who lives where, not who lives where, but where people are living, where they tend to go, retail clusters, parks, all the different types of land uses that a planner would be very familiar with, and then also looking at the relationship between those. Then when we look at the relationship between those, we look at the routes. That's the center image. And I wouldn't get hung up on technical names about the nature of the routes, like if it's a bike lane, if it's a protected bike lane from one residential development to a commercial district, because a comfortable bike trip can include all sorts of contexts. It can be on street, off street, in the woods, along a park, and back on the street. I saw that somebody else in the chat shares my commute of Floyd and Franklin, and that it's that kind of thing, or you can have comfortable routes from where you're going that have a mixture of types. And so that's the center icon, is that engineers, we look at, after seeing what the relationship between all these origins and destinations, what are the opportunities to come up with routes? And so a lot of those images that you saw on Jake's presentation, some of them are like out in the woods. It's a trail with trees around, and others are trails that happen to be right next to parked cars, where you're protected from moving traffic by sitting still traffic. And so you go from there to the icon on the right-hand side, which is interconnect modes. I thought this was an interesting and important point that the Dutch drove home, pardon the pun, where even though we think of them, like American engineers who are pro-walk, pro-bike, we think of them as a bicycling mecca, but they're very careful to interconnect their modes, including car traffic. So they talk about bicycle plans as car plans in the way that people move through space. That's a whole other tangent I won't go down. But for us in Richmond, this is really important because we know that even if people could ride a bicycle, like physically able to ride a bicycle for every single trip, we know that that's not going to be every single trip. There will be times when it makes sense to simply walk or to drive a car or to ride with a group of people or to be on a bus. All of this, though, when it comes to figuring out the different modes, interconnecting the modes, and so working with making our bicycle infrastructure interact with everything else, we do want to set priorities so that walking and bike riding gets more convenient as car driving gets less convenient. And that's something that if you've been to one of the city's speed management symposiums, you've heard about that before, where we talk about speed management as a key to Vision Zero. Because if we're going to save lives, that means the biggest way to reduce crashes is to reduce crash energy, or severe crashes is to reduce the crash energy. And the best way to reduce crash energy is to lower speeds. So as you lower speeds, there are some people who will say, well, okay, driving's no longer that convenient for me because now it takes 10 minutes to drive from point A to B within the city. It takes 8 minutes to ride my bike. I might as well just ride my bike and I can get rockstar parking. So if you go to the next slide, I'll get into this interconnecting of modes. So I find myself saying this a lot recently, and I don't remember where it came from, but this reminder that we have free sidewalks. Richmond has an incredible walkable core. There are portions of the city that were brought in from Chesterfield County years ago that are much more suburban in style. In some areas look almost rural, but for the most part, it's a very walkable city. And it's free to use those sidewalks. That's fantastic. But what I would say is in your advocacy for pedestrian infrastructure, which we generally think of as sidewalks and ADA ramps, don't be limited to just thinking about those two things, sidewalks and ADA ramps. You don't have to, when you come out of your home or you come out of work at the end of the day, you don't wait around for the sidewalk. You don't have to open up an app to see if the sidewalk is working. And you don't have to think, well, is the sidewalk just for those people? It's always there. It's always on. It's generally speaking safe. If it's well designed, you barely notice it. It supports commerce, mobility, getting around, health, freedom of movement. No instructions necessary, no extra money necessary. It's intuitive. So that type of framing is what we can apply to the bus, local bus service. You probably know, but if you don't, GRTC in Richmond is free. Well, not just in Richmond, it goes into the counties. GRTC bus service is free. That's fantastic. There aren't that many cities that can brag like that. And so a well-run bus system, the more frequent it is, the more routes it takes, the more reliable and safe it is, functions just like an express sidewalk. So if you're out in Carytown and you're trying to get on the other side of Arthur Ashe, you could easily walk with enough time, but maybe you're carrying bags, maybe you went shopping, maybe you want to get there a little bit faster. Get on the motorized sidewalk. If that bus keeps coming, you step on, you step off. It's that easy. And so that is thinking of the bus as a piece of infrastructure that dramatically expands the number of destinations within walking distance, I think is really, really important. And I'm talking a lot about bike infrastructure in Richmond, but this is part of how we want to fit all of that together with our bike infrastructure. So being a pro walk advocate also means being a pro transit advocate. They're inseparable. And then the third thing on here, free bike lanes. That's another thing. You don't have to pay a fee when you use them. Just bring your bike. One thing that I would say, this note on here says we've got some Copenhagenized streets. Jake showed some pictures of the parking protected bike lanes. That does a couple of good things. One is a very practical shortening of crossing distance, like any road diet would do for people walking or rolling across the street. And the other it does for those of us that are riding bikes in the bike lane next to the curb, it gives you extra separation from moving vehicle traffic. So this is the kind of thing that was made popular in Copenhagen, where people still needed to park their cars somewhere. So they shifted that out into the street, away from the curb, again, to give the priority to people sitting in the saddle. Green buffered streets. So what you see in this image is an indication of what is coming in Richmond, which is really exciting. These types of infrastructure projects take a really long time and a lot of money, but the time is usually a direct function of the amount of money that it takes. But the Richmond, or the city of Richmond, is very close to publishing a guide to greening multimodal buffers, which is an engineering guideline or guide that is it's an extension of existing documents that we already have, where engineers will be able to, as they're working on street projects, instead of us just telling a consultant, for example, we'd like some green over here, we'd like a buffered, a protected bike lane, they'll be able to take this document and see which corridors are good potentials for having landscaping, so street trees, shrubs, native plants, that sort of thing. Sometimes it will be along an entire corridor, and sometimes it will be sort of like an end cap in a grocery store, where it's the beginning of an aisle, you have something fancy, and then it's just kind of boring through the aisle. But Franklin Street, First Street, Third Street, Bird Street, these are some areas where we're looking at this sort of thing. Let's see, what was the other thing that I wanted to say? Oh, just to underscore, this guide already has some rave reviews from NACDO and Dutch Cycling Embassy themselves. They saw this as a first of its kind resource that, as they were looking at cities across the country, nobody else has something quite like this. A decision tree for engineers to be able to go through steps to not just throw down some some concrete for a mile or a half mile, but to actually have a beautiful street. We know this kind of thing is directly related to economic development in commercial corridors. It's really important. You get heat mitigation, stormwater benefits, all sorts of things. So this is a really exciting thing that's coming. One of the things that the Dutch impressed on us when they were here for the training was humans, we need functional streets, we do need safe streets, but we also need attractive stuff. Like, humans appreciate beauty. So this is something that's going to help deliver that. Next slide. So back to culture change. We want to normalize getting around the city using our free sidewalks, using our free express sidewalks, and using our free bike lanes. You guys wouldn't know this, but recently, a couple months ago, within the city, we had a survey that was published to employees in all different departments that showed that almost 30% of City of Richmond employees live within 5 miles of work. And within the next few years, we expect to have over 100 miles of connected bike lanes, paths, whatever term you want to use, making those city hall commutes an easy bike ride, whether it's an acoustic bike or an e-bike. Some of the folks that live further out past the hills, or Churchill, where you don't want to go down into Shockoe Bottom and all the way back up again, it's going to be important to have something like an e-bike. But that's really exciting. And so as we expand this network, just City Hall commuters alone are going to benefit tremendously, let alone everybody else. So one thing that I would say as I wrap this up is, those of again, this is anybody that would want to be part of a webinar like this, we tend to ask, what are the planners doing to plan for a better bike network? What are the engineers doing to engineer the better bike? One thing that we often miss as advocates, I'm saying we because I advocate for all ages and all abilities bicycling as transportation. I would say, think of what you can do. You as an individual, you as a block, you as a neighborhood, you as a church group, you as a sports group, like whatever things that you're doing in your ordinary life, what can you do? And so a few things you could do, very related. You could organize group rides, get people familiar with the many quiet streets throughout the city of Richmond that can be part of an all ages and abilities bike network. I had a chance this week to join one of the bike buses on Bike to School Day, which was really fun. And just talking with some of the parents who were there. And these were not what I would call bike people. One dad in particular who was just gushing with positive stories about riding bikes with his son. He said he wasn't even the one pushing this idea of riding bikes to school. It was his young son. And his son was there and just nodding and smiling like, yeah, I told dad that I want to be able to ride bikes to school. And so this dad and some of the other parents in their own neighborhood, they hadn't ever ridden around to see that some streets are just so quiet that they don't even need bike lanes on those particular streets. And then they see immediately other streets that they want to avoid. So organizing a group ride is really beneficial. And it's fundamental for culture change because people have to be able to see others doing this sort of thing. Ride your bike to a bagel shop and then tell the manager you rode your bike there. Ride your bike to an art gallery and then tell the owner that you rode your bike there. Ride your bike to the National. And then when you post a selfie on Instagram during the concert, tell people, hey, I went to see Pat Benatar or whoever came to town. I rode my bike there. So those are the kinds of things that we as advocates can do that not only are uplifting within the community of advocates, but also are going to help normalize bicycling as transportation. And then I'll leave you with this QR code on the right-hand side is for the upcoming Speed Management Symposium. It does not have the name bike in the title, but you will absolutely appreciate the content and what you hear and see and the people you interact with at the Speed Management Symposium. Plus, as a special bonus, free concert right after that. So scan that code to RSVP. There's free food, free music. And yeah, I'll leave you with that.
Well, that's a tremendous call to action and also a link to an event that everyone was welcome to attend, a free event. We're going to jump right into hearing from Phil Riggin from PlanRVA, and we're going to get to your questions. Thanks for a few of you putting some in the chat. Take it away, Phil.
Thank you. Sid, I was going to say, I'm going to probably go through this, especially this first part pretty quickly, but just so everybody knows, you see there in the center, that's, the city of Richmond. That's Jacob just went through all this stuff with city of Richmond. Obviously, Andy is still working with all of that infrastructure there. Well, I work for the entire region, 9 different localities, and we're trying to have the bike and pedestrian. That's what I do, at least. Planning for the entire region. Go ahead, Sid. Obviously, I'm focused on transportation and pedestrian safety, but PlanRVA has lots of other areas that we focus on. Please advance. Data. So a large part of this, that first line, using that data. So we work with all 9 localities, and what I'm about to show you guys is we've been trying to collect a lot of the information for an update to our bicycle and pedestrian plan. So next slide. So in May 22, after several years and dealing with COVID, all these delays, we went through the update, an 18-year process it took us to update the bicycle and pedestrian plan for the region. And I'm pretty sure we had Jacob helping a lot with that, but and there's a few people on this webinar who were also participating in that. We're collecting data from all the different localities. Well, part of our plan at the time was, let's make sure that we don't let this sit on a shelf for 18 years. And so we've been trying to update it now. We're in that process now of, essentially getting ahead of all the funding requests, all the federal and state funding requests that we can. And as you see here, for approval by our technical advisory committee, that's this coming Tuesday, I've been collecting proposed projects. We have a spurs definition to match the spines, and I'll get into that in a second. And then we've kind of selected the regional spines and spurs that are a part of this whole network we're trying to build. I'm saying a bicycle and pedestrian network for the region, not just within the city, or not just, as Jacob was showing you, some of those opportunities to have a road roadway reconfiguration and to create a bike lane. It's more like how do all of those bike lanes come together, not just within one locality, but for the entire region, so we can have a network so people can move around safely. Next slide. So we're updating our bicycle and pedestrian plan. There are 3 other recent comp plan updates with Richmond, Hanover, and Henrico. And Chesterfield is beginning the process now. I see JJ on the call. He's in the middle of this stuff for Chesterfield right now. But like I said, trying to get ahead for our all the different applications for funding that people, different localities are applying for. And then, of course, for PlanRVA, for the region, we're working on the Pathways to the Future, the Transportation 2050 plan every 5 years. That's why I tripped up. But every 5 years, we have to update that. It's a federal mandated thing. And I get to include all the active transportation information in with that planning process. Next, please. So, as I said, we're working on proposed projects. This is the collection of all these dotted lines on this map, all the proposed projects within the region. There's obviously a lot of, it looks, like a mess, right? Well, if you're able to zoom into the localities, and I'm going to share a link in here in case you want to look at it more closely. First of all, the first line is the bike ped plan. And then the second thing I put in the chat is the link to a story map that allows you to look at a lot of the different layers that we've put together, all the data. But essentially, as you can see, it's a jumbled mess. We've had a lot of new things added with Henrico. They had not really had it fully planned before. Huge network. Chesterfield still has a lot of lines within theirs. Some of these lines may never become a bike, any kind of bike infrastructure. But the idea of planning ahead for it, that's where we're at. And then, as I say, this is what we have here is a collection of all the different plans from the regional comp plans. So next slide, please. And again, we're focused on all the different types of infrastructure with bike lanes, cycle tracks, as Jacob mentioned. That's that 2-way track. And it's protected, usually in the city at least, with parking, floating parking, shared use paths and trails, mixed traffic facilities, which would be more like Floyd Avenue, one of those where it's more friendly to bicycle and pedestrian travel, but not necessarily secluded or excluded. And then natural surface trails, which we are starting to get into a little bit more with some of the rural localities. Powhatan has identified several natural surface trail opportunities, which we don't yet know if that means, fire road type, a gravel path, dirt, could be for horses even, but the idea that we're trying to have this network connect for everyone in the region. So next slide, please. Again, like Andy has been talking about, like Jacob talked about, we want it to be something that's comfortable for all users. And so what we've been working with, this is just a quick way to show that. But in this graphic, that level of traffic stress 4 is, hardy cyclist, somebody who's really not that afraid of anything. But what we're really working toward is that level of traffic stress 1, where everyone, all users, novice cyclists, 8-year-olds, young people, all that, you want that to be the standard, the safest as possible. And it's more difficult, obviously, to get to that level, but that's what we're trying to get to. Next slide. So again, we were working with the region. We have regional spines. Everybody who has heard of Capitol Trail, that's that east-west. And then the north-south would be Fall Line, as we've identified, trying to get from Ashland to Petersburg, okay? We don't have a west, really, at this point, but on this list of regional spines, we have the James River Heritage Trail, or the potential 3-notched trail, which would connect Richmond through Henrico, Chesterfield, Powhatan, Goochland, something on the way to Charlottesville, okay? So then we have regional spurs. Those would be more of the connections from the spines into the neighborhoods, or really connecting to each other, okay? And we also identified, which I don't have listed here, local spurs, which are really just off of some of these major, like Fall Line, for example, into some of the communities. Chesterfield's done a great job of identifying some of those shorter routes, but that really just become that way from the neighborhood to connect into that larger spine network, which is a big part of what we're trying to do. Just have more separation for cyclists away from the major automobile routes. And that last little line there, localities get scoring credit. When they put in applications for funding, our goal is to try to, with identifying all these in this mapping process, in this planning process, to give them credit, for having planned those routes ahead of time. Next slide. So again, this is kind of hard to see on this. The map I shared would be a little bit easier to see, but you can make out where the Capitol Trail is. You can see Fall Line is sort of that north-south between Ashland and Petersburg. And some of that red, it'd make more sense if you were able to see the roads a little better, but they're following identified routes within these sub areas. You might be able to see like Hull Street Road, for example, and how that connects through Chesterfield. Some of these routes that are in the city and so on. Check out that map instead. So next slide, please. So a couple other things I want to mention really quick. We have our near miss dashboard, and that's really an effort. This is not people who necessarily have crashed. This is an almost crash. And we're trying to have users help us identify some of these areas that we need to focus on that may not be showing up because of crashes that involved getting the police there and having, actual people hurt. But this is more like, okay, we see a lot of people who are using Forest Hill Avenue, for example, or some identified corridor, what the problem might be. And so anyway, we haven't yet fully launched this because we have a very slow server that we're working on. You have to wake it up when you actually use that URL. So it takes about 5 seconds or more for it to get going, but we are collecting data on there. So, please go take a look at it and see what the dashboard says about some of the areas that we've been identifying so far. Next thing. And lastly, I think, this is a good way to hand it off to Kristen because, this is her job, the Engage PlanRVA. We've been going through a lot of this. I don't really want to speak when I think Kristen's better at this than me, but we did just go through a lot of the multimodal part of the LRTP. And so anyway, Kristen, I think your turn.
Yeah, thank you. I'm actually not going to speak on that. I put some links in the chat. We want to make sure we get to the questions from the group, and we did have a few. Kelsey, I know you had a question there, and it seemed like it was directed a little more towards Jacob's comments. I don't know if you were able to see that, but I can read it out. Kelsey says, with that first before-after picture near the War Memorial, I'm wondering why the bike lane was removed on 2nd Street between Spring and Browns Island Way. So feel free, Jacob, to jump in there.
Yeah, so I actually was just down there the other day, and that has taken place. There's been a lot of construction on 2nd over the years in front of the War Memorial. So 2nd has been in flux, and I'm not sure where things currently stand with respect to restoring that striping. 2nd had restriping done to extend the bike lane farther to tie into Bird Street with the completion of the bike lanes on 3rd and Bird. So not quite sure. I can't speak to that since I've been gone from the city in that interim period.
I think we actually had another participant sort of add something, an M. Sawyer, if you want to check the chat, folks, to see another comment. Coleman also
Yeah, that
guy. Welcome to RVA, Coleman, a cycling and urban development regulatory professional, and asking about Broad Street, thoughts on a conversation that's of that stretch. So downtown Broad Street stretch.
Broad Street's a fantastic one that got a road reorganization. I'm so used to saying road diet, but I'm trying to change my habits because road diet tends to make us visualize something where the curbs come in. Broad Street has wide sidewalks and now an express sidewalk. BRT goes down there. It's right now GRTC's busiest route. So that helped also to bring speeds down. So it functioned not only to speed up the express sidewalk, but also to slow down drivers. There's some other projects that are ongoing to slow drivers down. But that's an example of like part of the complete streets conversation, or that image of the different modes connect, like how do you interconnect modes? So not all streets should and will look the same, and they won't function the same. Some of the cross streets, like Shepherd, is not going to be the same as Broad. One's very narrow, one's very wide. So not everything's going to have bike lanes. Some things are going to have bike lanes, and they're going to be like Franklin. But Broad Street's not the type of street that's going to look like Franklin, but it is going to be fantastic for, again, for walking and extending your walk shed way beyond what you may have thought. Like I can say with a straight face, once bus service is free and expansive and reliable, that I can walk from City Hall to Willow Lawn, right? If I've got the kind of fancy footwork that GRTC provides.
Thank you so much. And I know there are a few more questions, and I want to be mindful of that we're close to time. There was a question from David Cook about incentives in the form of reimbursements for monthly bike maintenance, or to help pay for e-bikes through rebates for city workers. There are a few other things. I don't know if, Andy, if you want to address that from the city's perspective.
That's my alias. I was asking that question so that somebody would give me a rebate. Right now, one of the benefits that city employees get who ride their bikes to work is we're going to live longer than the rest of the city employees who. There's not at the moment. There is something that's in the works, and I've been pushing on the Human Resources Department about this, but they had, long before, I've only been here about a year and a half, but before I joined, they had begun considering an opportunity to give people, instead of providing car parking for long distance commuting, if you wanted to give that up, there would be a benefit for either walking or riding the bus, which is free, or riding your bike to work. So that's my non-answer. I would love it rebate. And that's something just broadly, another type of thing that we as advocates can push outside, like not only to decision makers in politics, but just part of normalizing bicycling as transportation is getting people to realize an e-bike is something that erases hills. It makes it so much easier to come out of a red light and get a little bit of boost on traffic, which is a big deal. Even if you're in a protected bike lane, it's nice to get that head start. And so getting opportunities, finding funding for those sorts of things to give rebates, that's a fantastic sort of entry point, I think, into changing culture.
M. Sawyer was also asking about, thank you, about funding. Where do you get the money to make cool stuff happen? And I want to make sure, Natalie, if you want to jump in and to wrap us up, we are at the 3:30 point. Anybody who can stay for the next couple of minutes, we'd love to be able to wrap up with you and potentially answer your questions. Where does the money come from all these things? Anyone can really take that.
There is no more money. That's the problem. Nah. Some of the funding is still up in the air, and it's something that we're kind of feeling through right now, unfortunately. But yeah, a lot of federal money comes to some of these bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure projects, and it's a challenge right now. So we'll see.
One great reason to organize local rides, just low key, doesn't have to be highly organized, and talking to business owners about riding bikes as transportation to get around, is that when the funding does come, and Richmond is in a fortunate position of having the ability, like years ago, funding applications began, so that now we're finally implementing some things, that hardening some of the bike lanes. And some of the strongest resistance will be business owners who think that on-street car parking is way more important than bike infrastructure. So if regular people could show themselves riding bikes and show the need for accessibility on bikes with business districts, Manchester, Scott's Addition, even more, Carytown, just all these clusters of business, show them that you want to spend money there and you want your wallet to slowly arrive on a bicycle. that's going to go a long way to help us spend the money when we get it.
I agree, Andy, and I think that's a really great way to wrap this webinar up as a reminder that everyone can involve themselves in Bike Month and be a part of some of these group rides and social outings that Andy has been mentioning. So again, if you're interested in joining Bike Month events, you can check it out at rvabikemonth.com, and we have a whole calendar prepared for you, so you can join in and contact us if you have any questions about the rides. And if you have any follow-up questions about this webinar or any questions that didn't get addressed, you can shoot me an email at natalie@sportsbackers.org, and I will work to get all those questions answered and sent back out to everyone. So thank you all so much for joining us, and thank you to our panelists for sharing all of this insightful information, and have a great weekend, everyone.
Thanks so much. Happy to be with you. See you
Thank
on the
you.
see you on the roads.